was just a different, you know, I've said this, and I think a lot of voice actors feel this way. I feel like it's come up on a lot of panels that I've done with, you know, the voiceover greats like Maurice LaMarche and Rob Paulson and people like that. But doing voiceover work and Cora specifically, because I've had so much experience doing just that role, is in some ways the closest to being a kid and using your imagination. Because I was for sure that kid who spent I'm an only child, you know, from like split parents who never remarried, so I spent tons of time alone and tons of time just in my head. And so I think that for a lot of us voice actors, you know, if you get to create an adventure that is on the page but has to kind of live in your mind, there's something about that that feels like, I'm a kid, I'm still a kid, like I'm never gonna get old, this is great, I can still operate with all these parts of my brains that maybe we shut down more little by little as we get older, and we are tasked with not shutting them down, and it's such a privilege to not have to kind of push that aside, you know? So that's a big one for me for sure, of course. And then probably Burning Love for me too, because it's such a different character than any character I've been able to play before.
Now Dante, I've got to ask you the big question just because I don't have a lot of time. How did Robin Williams affect you? How did it hit you?
You know, it was definitely kind of like shocking. It's been a few years since I've talked to him or seen him, but he's always been connected. You know, he'll always be connected to my life, my career, and I was so. You know, it's one of those things like there's so many people went through a lot of stuff as far as just like worldwide, and I was like one of the people that they reached out to.
Yeah. And
so it was a very interesting time. I mean, it's like, to me, it's one of our, you know, I blogged about it. I just said a few words to memorialize them my own way. And I still feel like it's just kind of from a generation. It's kind of a death of our childhood in a big way. And it was really, you know, it's emotional for all of us. But he was just this amazing, amazing guy. I just feel very, you know, special to have had him be a part of like my breakout role in Hollywood. Yeah. And then there's certain other things that are everything that you want to think of Robin Williams. He delivered that in spades. And then so much he taught me as a young actor how to just have class, how to be on a set, how to be welcoming to the whole. When it was my turn to be #1 on the call sheet, I still go back to a lot of things that I learned from him about how to be a leader on a set and keep the morale up and how to treat other people. All that's important. Those are things that go beyond just the craft of acting, but the idea of how to be a leader upon the set, which is a really big thing. A lot of actors coming up don't really understand that, you know, when you're one of the people on the set with whatever, like the leadership thing, the whole set, cast, crew, everyone looks towards you for how the day's going to go. Yeah. And he's one of those guys that did all that. But beyond that, you know, I was a big fan of Dead Poets Society, so outside of all the zany, crazy stuff with Robin, we'd spend hours just talking about poetry. And he was a very big person that supported me as a poet. And we talked about Bukowski and Whitman and all the transcendental poets and Pablo Neruda and, you know, all these poets. Yeah. And, you know, consequently, like, just another part of him just in his support of that is I'm a poet, right? So I continue to be a poet after that, and he, you know, started the biggest mic venue in the country. It still goes on. So it's like he still has his fingers in those kind of things with inspiration from me.
He's a San Francisco guy too.
And he's a San Francisco guy.
He was so he performed at my festival in San Francisco and came to every single festival all 14 years, and is just an incredible fan of comedy and of young talent. And in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, he would hop on stage and play with people, but from a very humble place. You know, he really was just so joyful about performing and appreciating and talking with other comics and spending time and nurturing comedians and stuff, and was a great San Francisco person. You know, he was a person that the whole city really went into mourning. It was incredibly painful because he was such a part of, on a literal level in the San Francisco comedy world, but also figuratively for all of us. We attach so much to, you know, emotional memories of him and his work.
Since we've only got a couple minutes left with our one-on-one, did Chris get you into doing your podcast? Because I know you're part of the Nerdist world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's we were together for 7 years, and he really championed me all the way through, just like with encouragement, and he'd been in the industry so much longer than, I mean, I came in and basically met him like within the first couple of months that I'd moved to Los Angeles, and right away he was just like, you know, like he is, and that's why he created the sort of empire that he did in terms of providing places for other people to kind of come up and find their voice, is that he really has, it's almost a similar enthusiasm as Robin, in the sense that he like sees talent and he's not intimidated by it. He's just like, oh, you're so great, and you should do this, and you should, you know, and he really encourages people to do that. And so a lot of my friends who have podcasts on Chris's network, you know, were sort of like, he was like, I don't know why you don't have a podcast yet, when he was doing the Nerdist podcast right at the beginning. It was like, why aren't you starting one? What are you doing? And so when I did, he was like, that's great, you know, but I want that to live on the network. And I don't even know if we were together by that time, because we've been apart for a long time, but we're still very close. He's got, it was amazing to watch him, you know, I just watched him create everything that kind of exists now, and I'm such a fan, and I'm really inspired by him still. And there are times when I feel like I'm so overworked, I don't know if this is going to turn into a thing, and then I'm like, well, you know what, I saw someone that I care about feel the exact same way, going through the exact same thing, and he pushed through, and that's, you know, that means a lot, and like that stays with you.
Well, and we've even found on ours that whenever you start to record, you're like, oh, I'm tired, everything's going on, I don't want to sit down and do this, and then you start doing it, it's like, all the shit is gone.
It's so great.
Disappears.
It keeps you in the moment, like nothing other than acting, but sometimes even not acting, to be honest with you. But podcasting, because it's you know it's your responsibility to drive this through and be present for the other person. I feel the same way. I feel refreshed, almost like I was in a spa for an hour or something. And it is. Everything else goes away. And I agree with you. It's like one of the coolest ways to stay in the moment. And yet you're creating something that lives forever, so it's like the best of both worlds.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for the great questions, you guys.
And then after you. Do you guys need a drink first?
We can do it.
You both have shared a lot of your early childhood years, your middle years, and now we're looking towards the future. So I've got two separate parts I'd like to kind of go through here. First of all, voiceover work. It's got to be very different from going on stage on a set, from dance, or do you guys feel like you're pulling from all parts of your creative brain in order to transition into voice acting?
Yeah. For me, it's the same thing. I mean, I'm not, you know, I've worked with some amazing voice actors. I'm not the kind of guy that does all these different voices and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just acting. Like, whether there's a camera in front of me or there's a microphone in front of me, either or, you're really just, everything you've learned, you know, in studying your craft, you know, I was studying for like 20 plus years, and it's like, you're just acting. The whole root of acting is basically being in the room with whoever, trying to be truthful in this scene, trying to tell, we're storytellers, so it doesn't matter if you're telling a story through dance, through acting, through poetry, we're storytellers, so this doesn't really segregate my mind. It's like, how do you want to act? You want to act in this room right now, or do you want to act on a stage, or you want to act on a set? Well, I'm game to act and play, no matter what we do.
Yeah.
You know?
So you don't feel like you need the tangibles, is what you're saying, around you in order to get into a character?
No, because they're, you know, it's just, you're in the parameters of saying, I'm telling the story as the character in the story, or as a narrator, however you're doing it, you know.
That makes sense.
It's all about, it's, you know, at a certain point, you're trying to find truth. And, you know, truth is what resonates in a performance. And it's not one of those things that's hard to talk to other actors about. It's like, you do all your work. You're doing all your work so you can try to scratch some truth. Because that's what the audience is going to get. The audience is going to feel truth. That's what the universal thing. Whether the truth comes out in the writing, it's going to come out in the performance, it's going to come out in the direction. And when someone connects with that truth, they're like, that's what resonates. And so we don't catch that in every scene. The whole process of filmmaking and television making and art making is us trying to capture truth and trying to convey that. And it may come out in one scene in the movie, but that whole thing was worth that moment.
No, it's interesting too, yeah, because you think, like, on some level you think that the first take of something on camera or even on voiceover would be the most truthful because it's the freshest.
Right.
And that's
Sometimes
just not
it
true.
is.
Sometimes
Sometimes
it
it
is, and sometimes it's not.
Right.
Sometimes you get to that truth
Right.
4 takes in, sometimes it's 10 takes, you know.
See, Andrea Romano, she has a good ear for the truth. You know,
She really does.
that's what it is.
She really does. And but to be so technical as well.
Totally.
Like to have for her to have both of those skills is crazy. And the one thing I would say that while I agree with everything you're saying, I still feel like there are technical elements.
Of course.
Right, between if you want to like whittle down to technical
Yeah.
elements, something that is very different for me is like the difference between complete improvisation where, you know, there's a different kind of truth that you're kind of looking for there, but you're not going off a script, versus being memorized on a script and trying to make the words that are in your head that you've memorized stay fresh, versus voiceover where you're reading something. And I think that's you
like,
can really tell when people are reading.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's your task with like, I
And
do
sometimes
have
that
to
works.
read this, but like I don't want it to sound like I'm reading
reading
off a
it,
page. And
right.
sometimes you see cartoons and you're
How
like,
do
that
you do
person's
that?
reading.
Janet, how do you set your mind that it doesn't sound like I am going to?
Yeah, I think I really have
do
to imagine it happening, and that's kind of goes back to what I was talking with Josh about. Like, the hardest thing for me was the first season of Core because I hadn't seen anything yet, and so I wasn't in. I mean, I was doing the best I could to be in that world, and then once you're given the gift of seeing the first bits of animation, then it's easier to drop in because I really do picture her saying things instead of picturing myself in that world, and that really helps me not be reading off the script, you know?
Makes
And the
sense.
thing is, I mean, yeah, you need technique. I mean, like any other young actor, like go study. Like we've studied for years. Like technique, you're always trying to find truth. When you're shooting a movie over 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, you're not going to be finding it every day. You're going to have to lean on a lot of technique.
Sure.
And that technique is going to help you find truth.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. You need technique. You need more than one way to skin this cat.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be that kind of thing.
That's true.
And it's like and then other people, you know, they don't. Some young actor, I don't know. You talk to a lot of people like, what are you saying? Like you just going to wing it today? I'm like, do you understand? Certain actors, it's not ever winging it. Like they're like, okay, Marlon Brando, you're saying he was just getting lines in his ear. I'm like, let me tell you this. Someone coming in that's going to come and do something. Like I'm not coming here and read you some sides, right? If I just looked at it right now, it's not just me reading the sides. There's decades.
All the other times you
there's
ever
decades.
read
Yeah, the weight of what's coming in
Yeah.
is already going to be
Yeah.
a different. So it's never winging it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? If it's like Ron Williams getting on stage in improv, like he never did before. He's done this a million times. He's actually done this a million times. So it's not ever winging. Don't ever think when you're working with other actors like this guy just came and didn't do any homework. It doesn't. I don't care what he tells you. There's already been.
This stuff.
He could have been out drinking all night and thinking about this and doing and didn't get any sleep. Comes on stage, he's gonna plow you over in that scene because certain act that you can never
You can't
discount
skip ahead to
there's
someone
years.
else's process.
There's years and years of wait. There's like hours, thousands of hours on stage. There's all this stuff that you can't. You know what I'm saying? It's unquantifiable.
No, I think that's brilliantly put.
But young actors, they like, oh, well, I can just do that. I'm like, you can't do this.
Yeah.
You just can't do that because you haven't been a star in this industry for this long. A lot of things that it's very, you can't really, and I'm not an acting teacher, so it's hard to.
No, I love Lisa. I totally agree.
Janet, what you got working forward from here?
Well, I do my podcast every week, which Josh mentions. It's called the JV Club. It's on Nerdist. That's one of the joys of my life. I'm so excited to continue doing convention appearances and stuff to, you know, honor Core and get a chance to meet the fans and connect on that level. I'm on a show on FX that is called You're the Worst that I'm very proud of. And it's a really funny, sharp, fresh show. And we got picked up for a second season, so that's cool. The comedy festival is sort of gobbling me up right now. Like I woke up at 7 this morning and was just on my computer watching submissions from kids all over the country who, you know, want to come be showcased at the festival. But then like I'm also on the phone with Chris Hardwick saying, when can you do this? You know, can you do this? And so it's a cool blend of like getting really excited about new talent and then, you know, bringing back people who've worked so hard to establish themselves and getting them, you know, in a room together so that they get to interact and get excited about each other. So those, I guess, are the main things that I'm thinking about that are kind of on the horizon.
2015, 2016?
Yeah, 2015 will be Year the Worst. The festival just plugs on and on and on. Yeah, and the podcast is, is every week.
What specifically do you look for when a submission comes in for the fest?
Well, I think honestly, there's really a lot, even to what Dante was talking about. I think that we're interested in kids who are, and I shouldn't say kids, some of them are, 29 and they just started doing sketch and they're great. But I think that we're looking for people who aren't leaning on the expectation that they're going to get a laugh. I think we get really excited about people who have a different perspective and who also are, interested in some sort of authenticity, which I think can be challenging to find in comedy because sometimes people aren't necessarily connecting with the truth of it. They have an idea of what they think happens in a funny sketch, and sometimes it doesn't translate. Yeah.
No, my son is in, he was just finished Second City.
Oh, cool, that's great.
And he's over at IO. We were just having a conversation about comedy and timing and tech and everything.
Yeah.
Because he does voiceover work, and actually this guy over here does voiceover work too.
Right on.
It was interesting that what my son Travis had said was about how comedy has become more cynical, whereas it used to be there was truth, which you guys are truth tellers, but it was truth with laughter. And now cynicism seems to have kind of replaced that. Do you guys see that, either one of you?
I think it's funny that you would say that because, like, even on Nerdist Network, with all of my friends who do it, whom I love, and there's so much, great stuff on there, but my podcast is very emotional, and that doesn't mean that it's not funny, and I do consider it a comedy podcast, but at the bottom of my own description it says, warning, this podcast contains sincerity. Because there is just so much snark and irony in comedy, and I don't think that it has to be like your Oprah Winfrey or your Conan O'Brien. Not to say that they both don't have elements of both, but I like the medium of, like, can you do a podcast, can you do a sketch, can you be a stand-up like someone like Paul F. Tompkins, people who are bringing in their, or Louis C.K., people who are bringing in their own personal emotional experience and finding a way to laugh at it. To me, that's more human than, separating the comedy goes here and the emotion goes here. And so, but there are even like really goofy, silly, great things happening in a world that is constantly, snarky, and with something like sketch. I mean, the Birthday Boys come to mind on IFC, which they were shepherded in by Bob Odenkirk from Mr. Show, which is a very sarcastic show. But it is like this sort. There's so much silliness and lightness to it, and they came out of the UCB and they're not dirty. And that's always refreshing too, to see somebody not leaning on going darker and darker and further down that rabbit hole.
I just think like with the genre thing is like always, it's so vast. You can't pigeonhole anything. There's no. I always tell people to choose not to like think about what things are or aren't, like, because it's actually everything. There's everything.
Yeah.
To limit ourselves into one thing, like you can do what you want to do, but there's so much. There's like it's actually infinite. So.
Yeah. I think falling in out of favor song. I mean, that's certainly true. But you're right. That's all happening, whether or not it's what the spotlight's on or not. And there's this, there's these sort of cyclical shifts that happen too.
Totally.
Nice. Well done. Thank you.
And that is time at that point.
Awesome.